Good evening and welcome to the second night of the fourth annual San Francisco International Piano Festival. My name is Jeffrey LaDeur, and it's my pleasure to welcome you to this evening's program, which is going to feature a mix of conversation and music. And it is my great pleasure to introduce my dear friend Albert Kim, who is an extraordinary person, pianist, composer, arranger, and thinker about music. And before we hear from Albert in words, I would love for his playing to act as a way of introduction for him. So we're going to start tonight with Albert's exquisite performance of Ravel's Une Barque sur l'Océan, Boat on the Ocean, from Miroir. Thank you so much for sharing your beautiful playing as well as your beautiful presence. Um, I want to welcome you, as I have every summer since 2017. And I'm, while I miss you being here in San Francisco, it feels like a real treat to be able to have this conversation with you through Zoom. So thank you, Albert.
Thank you, Jeff. Thanks so much. And it's I miss you too, and I'm feeling as close as I possibly can through this distance.
Absolutely. Um, so I'm just going to mention for our listeners tonight that while Albert and I have done some preparation for this interview on a technical level, and we've certainly talked about some things, this is going to be largely improvisatory, and and so we'll sort of explore a range of topics, and the evening will be interspersed with musical performances from past festivals, including two performances from last year's festival with the Fervida Trio. Um, One of the main subjects that we're going to address is the vivaciousness with which the younger generations are carrying on the torch of classical music, and how inspiring that is. But before we go there, I thought I would just start by asking Albert, actually taking a step back into early earlier in this year, around February or March, I think, of 2020. We spoke on the phone, and as we do, usually around that time every year, to talk about the upcoming festival and what you might perform and what would be interesting to you, what's in your hands, and you, in the most loving and gracious and polite way, basically declined the invitation to come to the festival this year. Of course, this was before coronavirus, so we didn't know that there would be no in-person festival. I wonder if you could share with us a little bit about where you were in that moment, what led to that, and where you are now, these months later.
About the time that you contacted me again, I had a lot of questions about um, where I was and why I was doing, what I was with performing projects. Um, I suppose that the term burnout, is quite popular among us performing artists, and we feel that from time to time. And this was a little bit different. I'd come back from this performing, I was absolutely exhausted, and there was this question that kept coming to mind, which was, um, why am I doing this, performing, and what is the purpose of the input, this incredibly intense input that I've given when the output is sort of in question right now, or rather, sort of the response that I was feeling. And so, what I told you at the time was, and I've made a decision to curtail performing in public and to pursue other projects that had been sort of percolating for a while in my mind, projects that I felt would align better, an input and an output that would align. I want to unpack that a little bit. Just a sense that the preparation for a one stage, one performance mentality, um, and sort of all the trappings of it had exhausted me creatively. A lot of that had to do with a sense of sort of the maybe the loneliness, or the not having a real um, conversation ongoing. I was just thrilled. I was enthralled, as always, when I was in San Francisco, and then I got on the plane and I came back, and it just all kind of went cold. and and I wanted to keep living with that. And I know this is something that we all live with, as performing artists. As far as where I am now, I've been working on projects that don't involve live performance, and of course, then coronavirus happened, so we couldn't do them. But I've been working most recently on a CD recording together with another festival artist, Paul Sanchez. I've been working on making more videos, such as the very early attempt you saw with my Ravel with images. I've also been working on a presentation for an upcoming Ives conference on the Concord Sonata on the 100th anniversary, which was postponed, as well as all the other events this year. A multimedia um, argument for the performance that I had actually premiered at San Francisco back in, I think it was 2018, wasn't it? So,
Festival audiences will remember that um, very special afternoon at the Legion of Honor with the lights half dimmed and Albert performing Ives' Concord Sonata with images of different New England, kind of the ghosts of New England, I would say, and quotes from the relevant poets, and it was very special. So that was I didn't realize that was actually the first outing of that project, and that's a line that you've continued. Yeah, it's interesting, what you talk about this sort of existential crisis of the performer, and I'm paraphrasing a little bit what you said, but kind of the high and followed by the incredible low of concert performance. I mean, it's so easy to just sort of get your energy fix from concert to concert, and we call that a season, building a season of concerts. If one has a season of concerts, it's almost like a guaranteed continuity in terms of the fix. The preparation, the
mhm.
excitement, the nerves, the catharsis of the concert, however it goes, and then, rinse and repeat. When that's removed from our world, as it has been, it's just amazingly timely that you were already thinking along these lines before the external circumstances made it so. But it's interesting to think about where the kind of the spiritual fuel comes from and where does it go to. So when you talk about input and output, that's a little bit how I received it. If it's always dependent upon a moment in time and the validation of some external forces, is it sustainable? And is the only way to sustain it in that case to have enough concerts? Or is there some kind of internal energy source, some kind of internal generator that you've been developing or have been, refocusing some of your energy?
Yes, actually, the way you just phrased it, um, I would go so far as to say that is the way that one is expected to view um, concert career. I guess my question is it the only way? And are there other sustainable ways? There was an extraordinary opinion piece penned by the editor of the College Music Symposium, Lisa Urkovich, about the disruption to the industry, and pointed out two things that should not be missed. One was that all of the major recording studios and concert series and concert halls effectively have shut down in the entire world. The global industry has shut down. And in its place, there's been a resurgence of making music at home. And that happens through, well, in the initial weeks, it was through Zoom. Hey, here we are practicing, or here's a Zoom symphony or a string quartet, but also not just professionals, amateur or home and family. That became the primary outlet for sort of sharing music because there wasn't this behemoth of a professional um, industry that was churning out the artistic content that we're so accustomed to living with. She also pointed out that we had an incredible opportunity in this moment of disruption, one that had only come 100 years ago, which was with the advent of audio recordings. And that at the time, and of course, this is a college journal, so she said academia lost an incredible opportunity to be a part of that conversation and to help shape the use of audio recordings. Well, they turned up their noses at it. And so what happened? Recording industry took off on its own wind and its own sail, and it became the commercial giant behemoth that it is, and completely unbeholden to the interests of, you know, in many ways, the artists themselves. You know, they were selling records. It was a warning that this disruption won't last forever. And if attempts aren't made to pick up the threads where they're being exposed and to run with them, and to engage with them and not to turn up the noses again, and say, oh, these technological solutions are temporary, then maybe we lose this chance forever. I said earlier, one stage, one performance. We aim everything towards that. What about those moments? What is to be said for enjoying and reveling in the process more than in the product?
Well, and that's so apropos, this disruption that you talk about, because it one has to live in the present as much as possible during this time, and to hinge really anything on expectations or outside approval is to be sorely disappointed right now. And so it's interesting if the whole industry is built around that cycle of, preparation, validation, and repeat, then when the concert halls go dark, it's not just that the concerts have gone away. It's like the entire ecosystem has to change. And so that it does shift the emphasis from product to process. And it makes me wonder also, this may be switching topics a little bit, but the way that you described the commercialism and the kind of, there's a temptation to feel like this is something that we're coping with until something better comes along. Like you said, well, these are the technologies that we need to use to get through this until we can kind of go back to normal. On the one hand, the commercial giants that have dictated artistic taste to the masses. And on the other hand, the sometimes completely unchecked, artistically unsolvent sensationalism of social media. So on the one hand, we have the people that have been fed to us as the role models. The recordings that we learned in school were like holy relics that were to be, only dusted off and played and genuflected to. And then on the other hand, we have people with social media presence and marketing and perfume and gym shoe lines and no artistic kind of integrity. So is there something in between? Is there something in between for our audiences?
Let me ask you a question. Who are our audiences? Like if we're talking about San Francisco Festival, we have this amazing audience and there's this kind of anticipation and an expectation for the trappings. They don't know what we're going to bring each year. We're talking to all of you. You don't know. You don't know what we're going to bring. And yet there is a certain kind of core essence to what we're going to bring that makes you come to each festival. One person's entry point to classical music is not the person next to them. It's not the same for the person next to them. I think there's been a grave assumption, and there was so much tied up in a sort of stuffiness or a kind of genuflection, as you said, of the idols, leading concert pianists that feel like one is at a church service or a sermon instead of a live musical performance. And I wonder sometimes if the poison hasn't been somewhat flowing from the dissemination of it and the assumptions that we maybe unfairly have placed on our audiences. We're living, as you say, in a time of the social media where audiences exist that are untapped, that they have no idea who you are. They can click onto YouTube and look up something and then see something else unrelated, and suddenly they've stumbled onto someone that they're going to follow and subscribe to and just become a huge fan of. Vice versa, they can see something that doesn't click for them and they are free to change the channel. In fact, just one click away and they can change it. And there are maybe a dozen other things that they can be watching. We've suddenly seen kind of this democratization of an audience in a way that um, perhaps it's been frightening to us. Perhaps it's a frightening thing. What I'm so excited about when I look at social media is that there's an incredible untapped potential there. Untapped. I'm going to say it again. With all of the Zoom symphonies that we've seen, it's still untapped. We really are sitting on a revolutionary wave, and as much as we want to go back to the old normal, there are things that aren't going to go back. Or one can choose to be on the side of wanting to go back or wanting to press forward. And I think that's something that we'll leave to be decided for each their own.
Absolutely. And I like the way that you're speaking about this because it sounds to me like a both and rather than an either or. It sounds to me like you're kind of untangling the associations from these things that have been, bound together for so long. So, for example, the prestigious venue and the anointed artist are go hand in hand. I mean, you almost associate certain performers with certain venues, whether or not they play there more than a couple times a year. Um, there's an entire perception package that comes with that. Likewise, someone who's making music at home, even if they're, every bit the artist, there's a perception there of, oh, that's an amateur, you know. There's amateur music making that happens outside of Carnegie Hall, and then there's professional music making that happens in those hallowed venues. But it sounds to me like, by untangling those things, it's possible for one to have total embrace of the possibilities of this technology, of social media, of meeting your audience wherever they may be, very much as we are this festival, um, and that the artistic integrity is kind of neither here nor there. I mean, you can have every ounce of yourself invested in what you're doing in sincerity and artistic, merit, and you can add to that or integrate with that rather this new reality, these new possibilities. It's not doesn't take away actually. It doesn't mean that one is less than, and it also doesn't mean that someone is more than for not doing that or for having their agent do that or whatever the case may be. A lot of people listening, especially if they've heard you live in the past few years, but even if they're just getting to know you now, I think would be maybe a little bit surprised, at least on the surface level, by some of the things that you're saying because uh, I think when they hear you, they see and hear someone who is this seemingly limitless fountain of intelligence and creativity and achievement. And and I think they may wonder, what else is there? If you've gotten to this level where you're having this kind of spiritual dialogue, these intimate conversations with the composer, what is there left for you to achieve or to seek? I think a lot of us would be wondering, where else do you have to go?
I hate that question, don't you? Ah,
That was my Barbara Walters.
you did a great job. You did a great. Oh, oh, the burn. That's exactly that's it. I mean, there's such a disconnect in that. Our aspirations, and I think I speak for all of us who are joining us at the festival, are joining the festival this time, and who have in the past. We have such hopes and we have such aspirations, and we pour ourselves into them. And how many times, do we come out and a performance meant something completely opposite of what what the audience thought. And so you say, oh, for those who might be surprised, I will say this. I've often felt coming out of even just right off the stage that, oh, that didn't make the cut. That didn't make the cut. Now, you're like, what are you talking about? This isn't a comedy. Of course it's not. It's within oneself and saying, wow, I would like another shot at that.
Yeah, no, when you're at the champagne reception afterward, it's kind of a downer if you just level with the audience about how you feel sometimes.
I will say this. Um, how many times have we, or anyone who's watching, discovered that they couldn't sleep at 2:30 in the morning and they just started thumbing through their record collection or nowadays, YouTube, and they found some performance that they connected with, or that and maybe they connected with in the past, or maybe they didn't know and they started just, dialing through all these performances. I want to reach the person who's looking for something at 2:30 in the morning and who may have no idea who I am and I have no idea who they are. Um, and something like the Ravel video, I made that with the hope that in whatever way, shape, or form, that statement might still someday reach them as a message in a bottle asynchronously. That's the word of the year, right? Asynchronous and synchronous. We are specialists in synchronous performance. We don't give enough time to consider the value of the asynchronous.
As you describe that, it um, reminds me that that journey is really a journey within oneself, because the process that you go through in making such a video, for example, is not fleeting the way the performance itself was. That Ravel performance, I'm assuming, is a live concert performance that took place once
Mm-hmm.
and probably runs about 7 minutes. So that was one piece. But then your involvement with that piece, never mind the involvement that you had with it leading up to it and after, but the involvement with that piece continued in this particular way in your development of the visual and the, as you said, the asynchronous elements of the performance. So that turns everything on its head that we've been taught about the end, the last point of contact is the last note of the piece. The silence after the last note of the piece, that's where the experience ends. And it's followed by applause or, whatever. But this is saying that there's a much longer and a more internal kind of trajectory with a piece, a much more personal, subjective trajectory with a piece. That's not about, did I get it right? And is it good enough? But is it me? And did I say what I meant to say? Is that somewhere along the lines of how you feel about that kind of video?
I think it's absolutely along those lines, Jeff. And I think with the additional trapping of the fact that it's on YouTube and it's available for free, and this was a dirty word among the concert industry. Oh, it was self-produced, right? Because for something to have value, it must also be produced by a third party and peer reviewed and all of these things. No, I put it up on YouTube. Um, it's different even from recording, because when we record, we still feel this pressure. We need to, you know, we're going to have to find a label. We're going to be reviewed, and we have to submit it for approbation and approval professionally. This is completely outside that sphere. And so, yes, it was a performance that I felt um, maybe it was one of the more successful ones. But at that point, I wasn't even worried anymore. I thought, well, I think this has enough in it, and I really had some imagery in mind. And oh, look, I found it, and let me put this up on my channel.
There's music that we play for ourselves. Um, I mean, probably ultimately all music we play for ourselves, hopefully. But there's music that we play for ourselves in a more private or confessional way. the pieces that you go to for your own, sustenance, your own healing, um, probably in those late night hours.
Mm.
And it's sometimes strange to trot those out at a preordained time and venue. It's anachronistic in some way because even the same piece, it doesn't function the same, does it? When you go to the piano at 11:30 because you've had a hard day and that Schubert is the only composer that you can go to, for example,
Mhm.
then when you play that Schubert later in public, it can take on that quality, but it doesn't always.
We're living at a time where we can all do that, all of us. And it may not be in a concert hall. There's a trade-off, um, but that's a possibility for us now. We spend so much of our training period aiming for that ideal, right? I will go out, I will play. It's going to go as well as it's going to go, but I'm going to really focus on this. It's almost like a meditative kind of experience, and yet, what about all of the parts of us that live outside of that bubble?
Hmm.
And when you're preparing and you're alone with your instrument and you're alone with the score and the sparks that fly, then what about those? Could it be possible that there's something, there's a world outside of that 7 to 8 p.m. window that's been lost without, if you don't share that, if you don't have the opportunity to share that?
I think one of the most resilient and resourceful groups of people that have um, kind of shown us a path during this time have been our students. And so I wonder if now is maybe a good time to hear the outstanding Fervida Trio, Karina Sang, Sean Mori, and Angeline Kiang, play Pierre Jalbert's Trio, the first movement of which is called Life Cycle. So that was Pierre Jalbert's piano trio, written in 1998, performed by the Fervida Trio, who I am honored to say that I had the privilege of coaching for 3 years during their ensemble's history. They're all going separate directions now in pursuing higher education, but those musicians are from a fantastic chamber music program based in Burlingame, California. That's called Young Chamber Musicians. And founder and director Susan Bates has been a great friend and supporter of our festival. And we've established an annual collaboration with young chamber musicians. So it's fun to feature the Fervida Trio from last year. And also on Friday, a week from tonight, we'll hear two other young artists from young chamber musicians performing a Beethoven sonata for violin and piano, or piano and violin if you go by the manuscript, at Old First. So with that, that's kind of a nice transition into the world of education and what these incredible young people are doing, not just during the time of the virus, which has been its own inspiration and really masterclass for a lot of us, but what they're doing just generally. And I'm curious to get your thoughts, Albert. I think of you as a very passionate, sincere lover of education and advocate for students. And so I'd love to get your thoughts on what are you seeing, what are you hearing from your students during this time, and how are they responding to this extraordinary situation?
Well, we were just talking about how um, there's an opportunity, or if one chooses to see it that way, with social media and um, technology to broadcast one's um, process or product or whatever they find their artistic core to be, to share that with audiences that have yet to be discovered through technology. Um, as much as I wish that our peers would take advantage of this incredible disruption, I wish even more that our students would. And I think they are. I think they are taking advantage of it. I have yet to see a concert on TikTok, but I think that these incredible ideas, and they're not. They don't always. Sometimes they do hew to the line that we were taught and that we pass along. Um, in many other ways, they don't. I've heard so many groundbreaking, just every time I came to San Francisco, from our peers, and some of you are watching this right now. You've inspired me every time. I don't need to go into the list of the performances, but you can just open up your program booklet, and every single one, I walk home thinking, wow, that's possible. I just wanted to say to the young musicians who are maybe our students now, but they won't be forever, um, I'm just as amazed. I will say this to each of my students: that Chopin piece you're playing, every time it's played, it's new. So you may be playing it, and it may be the 200 millionth time that Ballade Number One has been played, and yet it's completely new. You have to believe that. There's no reason to play it otherwise.
Powerful statement. And I'm glad that you used such an iconic example, because I think that's a piece that a lot of us have played and taught for many years. And I would say that that's a piece that has traditionally a lot of charge. What I mean by that is, if you are the pianist playing for a panel, let's say an examination jury, whether it's at pre-college or college level, um, whether you're on the panel yourself listening to the pianist playing the G minor ballade, there's charge in both directions. There's a lot of baggage. I've rarely had the experience of sitting on the panel where someone has done this, but I know of situations where people start scribbling furiously after the first note, and you can just tell there's nothing that this poor pianists can do that will satisfy them, and what is not really a commentary on the performance that you're hearing. It's really just a commentary about the baggage. And so when you're talking about the G minor ballade is born again essentially every time we study it. I guess my question is, how do you balance that freshness, that real time integrity with what you find in the score, with your own history, with your own influences, many of which I'm sure you have not discarded. How do you balance that in such a charged piece that's so well known, so much part of you? How do you balance that? The balance between the moment and the masterpiece.
I don't speak to them as a student at the point when they're starting to, the ideas are starting to percolate into to foment, within their own performance. We're research partners. We're lab partners. We're researching this piece of music together, and I don't have the answers. I can't claim to have the answers. I'd posit that not even the greatest performer out there has all the answers. They may have incredible insight, but they don't have all the answers. Um, that I find unlocks incredible conversations. So I think that's the way to mitigate, for me personally as a teacher, this sort of potential of baggage to get in the way. I remember being, thrashed for the way I played it, many, many times verbally and by different teachers. I will bring none of that to the lesson,
We
because
have that in common. I just want to interject. The first master class that I ever played in was with the G minor ballade, which of course is like throwing meat to the wolves. Um, and I was decimated. I don't think it was because the performance was awful. Now looking back on it, if I had a student who had the opportunity to play in a master class, unless it was with you or one of our trusted colleagues, I probably would at least prepare them if they were going to play that piece and say, you're probably going to encounter some vehement opposition here. And it's not really going to matter what you do. You're going to learn more about the other person. You're going to learn more about how the teacher feels about the piece. And they may be able to help you with your interpretation, but more likely you'll get a lecture on how it should be played. And so, it's an interesting question as to whether you encourage that student to go forward and play it or maybe play something else, or you just kind of bolster them for the onslaught that they may receive. But what I notice with our students, just to generalize very broadly, I don't feel the same fear of that experience from them. In other words, I don't feel a kind of preemptive apology or I'm not worthy kind of thing that I certainly felt most of my life. And it's not arrogance because the students that I'm fortunate to work with are actually very, very humble. But they also have a kind of sense of worthiness. Like, well, I at least deserve to be here. I mean, I deserve to say what I think, right? And you can tell me if you think it's not right or if you have another idea, but there's this kind of sense of worthiness in having a platform to communicate. Are you finding that in your studio?
oh, absolutely, absolutely. Your students and mine, they absolutely don't carry that baggage, and I don't want to pass 1 ounce of it. I will say this: the pandemic improved their playing. You know why they improved? Because they couldn't have weekly lessons with me anymore. They could only submit recordings to me because I said, in this semester, there were, to be sure, three of them were preparing recitals. So they were finishing up. They weren't freshmen, and I wasn't just doing beginning work with them. And they were at a point they could be on their own, but I never thought about that. I said, don't do Zoom because the audio quality is terrible. Just send me a recording every week. And one of them actually said, I started re-recording myself because then I heard, I don't like that. I want to do better. I want to do better. And I thought, wow, when I told you you ought to record yourselves 2 years ago, you didn't listen to me. But all of a sudden, now that you have to, and guess what? Now that you don't have a teacher breathing down your back, you've become yourselves.
That's wonderful. I love that. No, it's so true. And I mean, I try to be very transparent with students about that, especially in a masterclass kind of setting, because I do quite a lot of coaching versus weekly lessons. And sometimes, if I see the student, let's say every 6 weeks or something like that, there can be this feeling of transformation that happens in the session. Saying a couple of words or making observation, and then suddenly everything comes together. And I always tell them, there's nothing that I or anyone else could have said to you during this hour that would have made that possible. Nothing. That was in you, and it was ready to come out. And if our conversation helped bring it to the surface, then that's great, you know. But there's not, there's no ownership there. So I feel tremendous pride and gratitude for my students and for their accomplishments, and I feel zero ownership. I mean, really zero.
Hmm.
I acknowledge that my presence is part of their process, and maybe sometimes even an important part of their process. But when I hear them play, and when they're really at their best, I don't hear myself at all. It's like witnessing some meteor shower or something. It's totally outside me. It's just something I observe, and I think, oh, wow, that's terrific. It's funny. I mean, I can think of examples where the group gave a first performance that was absolutely professional, competent, thoughtful. I mean, all the I's were dotted and the T's were crossed. And I think part of what acted as some kind of agent for change or catalyst was to call their attention to what is the core of this experience for you and for your listener. If the overall message of the piece is in any way out of focus, no amount of polish or accomplishment or technical acumen or anything can make up for it. And conversely, if the core of the piece is always in focus, those other things suddenly become, I wouldn't say less important, but they're transfigured somehow because they've been put in the right order of priorities. I mean, I would never say that I've heard a Beethoven string quartet played too well, but I would say that I have on occasion heard instruments played too well during a Beethoven string quartet.
Hmm.
In other words, that if you have the bandwidth, if you have that extra hard drive space to play your instrument that well, you must be missing something. Because if you're engaged in the core of what that piece is about, you will probably drop a couple things. I mean, most mortals do, I think. There could be some incredible performers out there that I don't know about who can balance all of their spiritual and physical and intellectual pursuits, but usually something wobbles a little bit if you have that kind of focus. And so I think when I've been most moved by my students has been when they have just let go of all those other things and just played to the core, whatever they feel is the real spiritual heart of the piece. And somehow everything then sounds right. It sounds right. And it can't be done again that way. That's another kind of poignant, I don't know if it's melancholy or something about the transience of when you do experience that, knowing that it will never be that again. It can be as great or as true, but it will never be that, because if it were that, it wouldn't be true.
Yep.
So, I feel like the students are very, they're extremely receptive to that idea, and I recognize that one has to be at an incredibly high level in order to even have this conversation that we're having. So for me to be able to say some of those things and then it just shows up in their performance instantly is like great luxury for me as a teacher, for sure. But yeah, that's how it's gone for me sometimes in those coachings.
That that honesty, in my entire, I've boiled it down to this. My one professional goal, I only share this with my students, but I tell them I have only one goal. It's to make a recording, not a professional one necessarily, that I can actually sit and listen to from beginning to end. Then I don't have to play anymore. Well, I mean, I'll still play, but that's, and meaning that it's honest, and it really kind of hits the points that when I really hear music that's honest, I love it. I can listen from beginning to end, not because it's perfect, but because it's honest from beginning to end, and it didn't go into some retread of a, or just a rerun of a, memory of having to run my fingers a little bit faster. And my students, and I think your students, and certainly many of our peers who have that courage, I'm inspired by that. And I feel that perhaps the path that I'm speaking to you about today is the big step for me toward being able to realize that it's not going to happen for me right now on a stage, for most of us. Um, but I feel that there's a place that I can start to exercise courage.
What you're saying reminds me. I think it was the Prix de Rome that Saint-Saëns was uh, about to win, and Berlioz was on the jury. I hope I've got this story right, but I'm pretty sure I do. And he said, of course, Saint-Saëns was a prodigy on the order of Mozart and Mendelssohn. I mean, divinely gifted in every way. As an instrumentalist, composer, sight reader, you know, sight reading entire full scores of Wagner operas like it was nothing. And Berlioz's comment, I think, is very telling. He said, he already has everything, but he lacks inexperience.
That sums it up, doesn't it?
I mean, it's the kind of naivete of anything that's true that I think that we're searching for, that we're talking about, that we've been talking about in different ways, in different language this evening. But I think, when something rings true, then it's inherently, it has that quality of not knowing, of inexperience, of we're all discovering this together, and there's no amount of preparation or being terminally overeducated or accomplished that can produce that. So I think that's a beautiful way to wrap up, and we can close the evening with another performance from the Fervida Trio, um, rediscovering for the first time, as it were, Beethoven's first piano trio, Opus 1, Number 1, the finale. And want to thank Albert Kim very, very much for his time and insight and generosity, not only tonight, but with the Piano Festival throughout these years, and for your dear friendship.
Thank you for the very same things, Jeff. Thank you.
Thank you. Good night.